If you're just joining us, the series we're in right now is on parenting. We are in our 5th week. We have one more week to go. The way we've done this so far is that I've gone and talked about kind of the biblical basis of parenting, because I'm 2 years into this and I'm still trying to figure out what it is that I'm doing. So we're looking into the scriptures and trying to draw from those how it is that we parent. I have up here on stage with me Dr. Janessa Jackson. Could you give a hand to Dr. Janessa Jackson? She's up here. She is a clinical psychologist, graduated 2005, and she works with kids every day. So you ever feel like this, like you look at the Bible and you read it, but then you can't figure out what it's supposed to look like in real life? You ever have that challenge or that problem? What we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, all right, let's look at the Bible, and if you could, Janessa, help us figure out how we apply this into real life. We've said before, if you're not a parent here, there's going to be something relevant for you, and this morning you'll see what that is as we get started. But we've talked so far about two big needs. When Janessa has been here with us, we've talked about a child's need for security and a child's need for compassion. The thing to know is that those two things are fundamental to the need that we're going to be talking about today, which is the need for guidance. So if you have not listened to or watched either of those messages or both of those messages, you can go onto our website, you can watch the videos, or you can download them and listen to them. The topics were security and compassion. Those two things, they pave the way for what we're going to be talking about today, which is the need for guidance. So if you have a question, as she or I are talking up here, you can text your question into this number right here. I'm going to take that off of the screen in just a minute. You can text that question in as we're talking, and at the end of this time, as we have time, we will respond to those questions. So we'll get started with the topic of guidance. Here's how we're defining guidance this morning. It is the act of leading someone toward a desired destination. We probably all understand this about parenting, that we want our kids to end up at a certain place, a certain destination. We know they're going to end up somewhere. And when they're 18 or when they're 21 or whatever age it is that they finally cut the strings and they go off on their own, they're going to end up somewhere. And what we're saying is we want to guide them, and we want to be the most influential figures in their lives that determine where it is that our kids end up. So if kids are going to end up somewhere, it just makes sense that we would be the ones guiding them. The challenge that I've already experienced in guiding kids is that they have this little thing called a will. And I'm not talking about what they're going to leave to their kids when they die. I'm talking about the will that is their sometimes stubborn, rebellious thing inside them that doesn't want always what I want. And so we just went to Branson this past week. We had a great vacation, had a great time away. We pull into our driveway after, it's been a great trip. And once Owen realizes, Owen is my little 2-year-old boy, once he realizes that we're coming into vacation and we're no longer going to be in Branson, he starts crying. And he says, I want to go on vacation. I want to go on vacation. And my will was saying, we're done with vacation. We are home. It's ready to move on. Time to move on. But his will was saying, no, I want to be in Branson. And here's the thing we can always expect, that the will of our child is at some point going to be different than our will as their parents. Can anybody say amen to that? It's true if it's a niece or nephew. And so life is great when our will and the will of our child or children runs like two trains parallel on a track beside each other. When they, in their will, are in line with us and our will, life is great. Everybody's happy. Everybody's enjoying things. The problem is when those two tracks collide and the will of your kids becomes different than the will that you have as a parent. There are a couple of ways that we can approach that or respond to it. One thing that can happen is that you can yield your will to your child's will. And I see this happening so much, and I'm not going to be one of those guys that says a lot of stuff that I'll never do this or I'll never do that. By God's grace, I will not be a parent that spends all of my energy yielding my will to my child's, because what happens is if you yield your will to your child's will, and they become the leader and you become the follower, and they become in charge of you and you have to feel like you have to go along with whatever they want, then what eventually will happen, life will collide with their will later, and eventually they're going to have to realize that they can't always get their will their way. Life is not like Burger King. So we need to understand this from an early developmental place, that if we yield our will to our children's will because we fear their disapproval, or we fear them not liking us, or we fear them thinking negative things about us, we've abdicated our God-given responsibility to be the parents. And we need to understand this. Children need parents, not servants. And a healthy role of parenting is serving. But if you've at a place in your parenting where you feel like you are just a servant to your child's will, let me just say, and the collision has occurred and you're losing, I want to say to you, begin fighting. And this morning, if you don't get anything else, I want you to get this, that God wants you to be the one who influences and guides your child's will. He doesn't want it the other way around. And so we can take that approach of yielding to their will, or we can take the approach where we totally disregard their will. And so disregarding their will, we become harsh, we become overbearing, we become very critical and mean-spirited, and we just treat them like their will doesn't matter. Well, they're just kids. It doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter what they feel. They don't have a voice. They don't have an opinion. And there's some of you, the only way that your parents really have related to you is you've grown up really thinking that your will didn't matter, your voice didn't matter. But I want you to realize this morning, God doesn't relate to us in either one of those two ways. God doesn't yield His will to ours. Now, He'll give us freedom and He gives us a will, but He doesn't yield His will to ours, nor does God come in and become overbearing and just overpowering and domineering and treating us as if our will and our concerns don't matter. So what I want to do this morning is to call you away from feeling as if you have to yield your will to your child's and let them have their way whenever they want it, do the Burger King kind of thing, or feeling as if you always have to dominate and never let them have a voice. And instead of those two approaches, what we want to do is to try to guide the will of our children. I want to give you 3 essentials this morning. I'm going to look at the scriptural basis for these. Janessa is going to help us figure out what it looks like to apply them. So open with me, if you will. We're going to start in Ephesians Chapter 6. Ephesians Chapter 6. We're going to be seeing here this morning 3 essentials for guiding a child's will. The first essential that we're going to point out here from Ephesians chapter 6 is this. Number 1, this is what you have to have if you're going to guide their will. A clear understanding of your God-given authority. You need to be crystal clear about this. And so look at what Ephesians chapter 6 verse 1 teaches. Ephesians 6 verse 1, it says, "Children, obey your parents." Can we say those 4 words together? Children, obey your parents. Now, if this were to be written in the 21st century and it was inspired by modern culture, here's how it might read. Parents, obey your children. Because we live in such a kid-centric world that oftentimes it's the case that the kids end up becoming the ones who are in control, and the parents are being submissive to and obeying the will and the wishes of the kids. But you have to see from the very beginning that what the scriptures teach about parenting is not that the child parents the parent, it's that the parent parents the child. Again, children need parents, not servants. So Paul the writer, as he's writing to the family unit here to the church in Ephesus, he makes very clear from the beginning that there is this hierarchy. There is an authority, and you as the parents are to be the authority. So, children, obey your parents. He continues on. He says, "In the Lord, for this is right." In verses 2 and 3, he mentions the benefit or the blessing that comes through obedience. He says, "Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth." So, first thing to understand about guidance is this, that disobedience is not an option. So, and the same thing, whether or not they are obedient to you, that shouldn't be an optional thing. Now, I understand that as the children get older, that becomes more difficult and tricky. I'll let you figure that out for us and talk to us about that. But especially when they're at a young age and when they are in your home, for them to be deliberately disobedient to you, this is not an option. There are 2 things that happen when your children are being disobedient to you, or when you're allowing them to be disobedient. The first is this: it means that you are being disobedient to God. So if you're allowing disobedience in your home, and this is blatant, outright disobedience, they won't listen to you, they won't follow your instructions, and you have to go along and always feel as if you have to pacify them and coddle and all those things, the simple truth is you're being disobedient to your Heavenly Father. Which is, if that's not bad enough, the second thing, which is even, I believe, more difficult, is that not only are you being disobedient to your Father in heaven, you're actually leading your kids to be disobedient to their Father in heaven. And I don't know if you've thought about this or not, but every person will be accountable to God for their personal actions. So when your kids get to this place where they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they become accountable to God for their actions. If for the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years of your life, you have allowed them to establish a pattern of disobedience to you, all you've done really is to assert the authority of God, and what you've done is to teach them that it's okay for them to be disobedient not only to you, but ultimately to God. Because if they're being disobedient to you, they're being disobedient to their Father in heaven. So the bigger picture that we've got to consider here is that God has given you authority, and you need to know that. You don't need to back away from that. We don't need to abuse it and lord it over, but you just need to know God has put you in a place of authority, nobody else. He's given that seat to you, and you need to feel free to use it. So Paul tells us in verse 3, gives the responsibility here to children, and then in verse 4, he gives us a clarification of how this authority is to be exercised. In verse 4, he says, fathers, and this would equally apply to mothers as well, but he says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So in verses 1 through 3, we see the child's responsibility is to obey the parent. In verse 4, we see that the way that the parent exercises their authority is not to be done in a way where they totally disregard the child's will, where they go around and you're giving a lot of shame, or you're creating unrealistic expectations, or you're always being critical, or you're always being harsh, or you're always over-domineering. If you're doing that and you're provoking them to anger, it's like you're trying to be obedient to half of the passage, but you're not being obedient to the full passage. We are to exercise our authority, but not in such a way that it leads to anger on their part. And so, Janessa, if you could, help us to get a little clearer picture as we think about this concept of authority. What are the do's and the don'ts of exercising our authority in our home?
Wow, that just seems overwhelming sometimes, the responsibility that God has given us to guide our children in obedience. And I don't know about you guys, but I think it's hard. I think it's really hard. Raise your hand if you have a child in your home right now that you are parenting, if you're in this boat with me. It's a tough age. We live in a time and a culture where today it is harder to parent a child on a pathway to obedience than it has ever been in history. At least within the recent history in the United States. The reason for that is because we live in a culture of disrespect. Children are taught and managed in such a way that things are not their fault. It's not their responsibility. It's somebody else's fault if they make a mistake. Media geared towards children is all about breaking down the authority of the adults. There is just a huge push. It's kind of a tolerance, equal rights thing, but it's gone so far as equal authority. That we should listen to our children's authority, not that we should just give them equal rights. So it's gone too far. So if you're trying to hold your child to certain boundaries, you're in a tough position in 2016. There was a missionary that visited the United States, and I heard this on the radio. When he left, his comment about the United States was it was the only country he had ever seen where parents obey their children. And I just thought that was fascinating, but so true. There was Dr. Phil. I heard an ad the other day about the Dr. Phil show, and if you love Dr. Phil, I'm not here to tell you to never listen to Dr. Phil, but he said, we're really only as happy as our saddest child. So I can only be as happy as however sad my child is. You know what? It's not about happy and sad. It's our child's emotional well-being can't be at the forefront, because in order to parent them effectively, we're going to have to disappoint them sometimes. We're going to have to upset them. As Bryan said, those train tracks are going to collide sometimes, and we need to win those battles. So it's a tough time. I would say if you were just driven by popular culture, and this is something I see in my clinic all the time, there's two most popular parenting styles, and truthfully, all of us have been there at one time or another, including myself. The first one, I've kind of come up with the term Recliner Parenting. And I don't know about you guys, but at the end of the day, I'm pretty tired. And I just think, gosh, I just need these kids to go to bed and stop talking sometimes. I mean, that's just where we get to. We're overworked. We're overscheduled. We have a lot going on. Imagine you're sitting in your recliner and you see your kids got some stuff, got some dishes or some toys out, and you're like, all right, get your stuff, pick it up, go brush your teeth, get in bed. And you're zoned out in your book, your phone, TV, whatever. 20 minutes go by, you look up, none of that's done. Then your kid says, oh, Mom, I'm so tired. Can I just go to bed? You know what? Yeah, that's fine. Just go to bed. Now, if that were the exception to the rule, that's not going to be the detriment of your children. But what happens is we get tired and we don't have any action behind our commands, behind our parenting, and so we just kind of throw it out there and hope for the best, and then we go to bed. What happened in that example is that my authority as a parent went from here to here. My words don't have any force behind them, and my kids know that if I'm doing that on a regular basis. The second type of parenting, and this is a coin term, I did not come up with this, that's very popular in our society right now, is what we call snowplow parenting. And what that means is we plow the way so that our kids are completely comfortable, they're completely happy, every child gets a trophy. Their emotional well-being is of utmost importance, and we never want them to feel any discomfort or pain or misery. That's just not real life. It's this child's birthday, but I'm going to give this one a gift too, so they don't feel left out. I want them to have a gift. I want them to smile. Well, that's just not reality. And ultimately, if we pave the path, if we prepare the path for our child instead of preparing our child for the path, then they don't have any personal responsibility. They're emotionally very weak to handle hardship. And I don't know about you, but life gets pretty hard, in my view, sometimes. I want my kids to be strong. I want them to be prepared to deal with disappointment. And when we plow the path for them, we're preventing that. This is an epidemic in America. And we say that we don't want our kids to feel unhappiness, but the truth is we don't want to have to deal with it. Maybe we don't want to hear the whining, or we don't want to feel the pain of it, so we protect them from it. In the short term, that might be a little easier. In the long term, there's a huge cost to them not having any ability to withstand frustration and disappointment. So what do? You have to get in the game. You have to not only give a command, but you have to follow it up with action. You have to show them no matter how tired I am, being your parent is my number one job. You got to get out of the chair, and you got to get in the game and walk through those hardships with them. I say, I'm sorry, I know this is tough, but you're going to get through it. Don't protect their every environment. Neither way works very well.
Excellent stuff. Is it okay to snowplow for my girl a little more than my boy? Does anybody else not have that? Oh my goodness, it is so hard for me. So I want to tie into, she talked about the consequence is so big. The very end of verse 4, Paul, he says this, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. It's not about just disciplining them for the sake of disciplining or instructing them for the sake of instructing. It's not about making our children good, moral, productive citizens who have an education and a degree and a job and a house and all that. We all want those, but the big picture here is we want to guide them to Jesus. And so if we abdicate our responsibility to guide them in general, then we're not ever going to be able to guide them to Jesus. So the big picture here is that the reason our authority matters so much is because our kids are going to end up somewhere. We want to guide them the way Jesus wants them to be guided. So it's very important. Essential number 1. Essential number 2 is this. After a clear understanding of your God-given authority, essential number 2 is healthy fear. Healthy fear. Now, when we say the word fear in our American context today, there is a little bit of a tendency to recoil because we're uncomfortable with that idea of fear, that a child should fear a parent. We had a discussion 2 weeks ago in our community group about this, and it was a bit of a debate. We were talking and saying, well, should a child fear their parent? Should they not fear? And some said yes, and others said no. Well, let me just tell you what the scriptures say about us in our fear of the Lord, and then I want to help you make application for you and your children. First of all, Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. It says this, a well-known verse, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The writer here is saying that to fear God is a good, healthy, positive thing. It is appropriate and right to, when you respond to God, to have a fear of Him. But it wasn't just an Old Testament idea. It wasn't just Solomon writing these things. Jesus also said, we see here, Matthew 10:28, He says, do not fear those who kill the body but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear Him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So what Jesus teaches here in the overall context, He's talking about God's concern for the individual and His awareness of you. But right here He's saying you should have a healthy respect and fear of God. So what we need to understand is this, that there is a good kind of fear and a bad kind of fear. And if you've grown up and the only type of fear you have known about your parents is this fear where you cower away, we're not talking about that kind of fear. We're talking about a healthy, godly fear. There's a guy named Martin Luther who wrote a long, long time ago, and he classified fear in two ways, and I'll give you what his classification is. This was helpful for me in understanding what fear needs to look like in our setting. He said that there are two types of fears. The first type of fear is called a filial fear. And a filial fear is just the family type of fear that means you have an adoration, a respect, an admiration for someone or something. So this filial type of fear is a healthy type of fear. This is the type of fear that develops when you have security and compassion. You have clear boundaries. You have consequences. You are present for your children. The filial fear is the fear that needs to be present in the life of your kids. They know that because you love them, you're going to follow through on your word. It's not just going to be empty threats. There's actually going to be consequences associated when you break those commands or whatever it is that they give. So the filial fear is a healthy, good reverence. The servile type fear, as Martin Luther says, is the fear that a servant or a slave would have of their master. So a servile fear is the kind of fear where you cower away, where you want to go and hide when you have difficulties or hide when you have hard times or when you fail. What we want to see in the lives of our kids is the filial type fear, not the servile fear. We don't want our kids to look at us like we are the master and they are the slave. If you think about Adam and Eve, what did they do as soon as they messed up? They ran and they hid. And so what we're saying here is that we want to have the kind of relationship where if your kids struggle or if they fall on hard times, if they've done something wrong, they may not want to just come to you and say, hey, guess what I did? But they know that we're going to be a safe place from them. Not a safe place from consequences for their actions, but we're going to give them security and compassion, and they're going to know that at all times they are loved just as much on their good days as they are on their bad days. So if we give them the filial type fear, not the servile type fear, this can be a healthy thing. So the question is, Janissa, what does this look like? How do you instill this healthy type fear into your children?
The best way to instill a healthy fear is to be predictable, to be consistent. I had a professor once that said parenting should be like this. Every time I let go of this pen, it falls to the paper. So every time your child does A, B happens. This is parenting in equation. If you do this, then this. Not, don't you dare do that. And then who knows what may or may not happen if they do it. Parent with an equation. Connect what they're doing to the consequence, good or bad. You know, if you work hard and you make good grades, then we'll take a day out just for you. We'll go do something fun. It can be positive or negative. You know, that's the reason that we fear the Lord, is because He is who He says He is. We can count on Him. He is faithful. He does what He says He will do. So that's the same thing in parenting. Your children are going to fear and respect you when you are who you say you are. You're not just throwing out empty threats that you may or may not ever follow through on, because they know. They know you're not likely to do it. Now, there's these two types of fear. I would say there is an epidemic with a lack of fear at this time in our culture. This is a culture of disrespect. Truthfully, my kids have said things to me, and I think, oh my word, like I would have never said that to my parents. And maybe I did, and I just blocked it out because I don't want to remember it. But there's a whole culture driving this. You're going to have to fight for this healthy level of fear in the relationship with your kids. I want to give you an example with my daughter. And when she was 2, you take them out of the crib and you put them in the toddler bed. And let me tell you, that's a rough change because I love the control of the crib. Like, I just put her in bed and I'm done. Like, that's my time. I don't have to parent anymore, and she's trapped in there. Well, then she gets this big girl bed, and I'm nervous about it because I'm thinking, oh, great. And so in my mind, I'm developing this plan. I'm going to put a little chair beside the bed, and if she tries to get up, I'm going to put her in timeout, and I've got all this plan going. Well, wouldn't you know, first night, I put her in bed. She comes in, hi, Mom. Not a lot of healthy fear there, right? Told her I wanted her to stay in bed. She's just, hi. She's a very social child. So, okay. All right, I'm thinking, all right, I really don't want to battle. I'm tired. Okay, let's just do it. Go back to bed. Remember, I told you, you need to stay in your bed. A few more minutes. Hi, Mom. I'm like, okay. Oh, I really want her to do this. Okay, Addie, I told you, go get in bed. So now you see I'm getting mad, right? I'm starting to get a little irritated because look at me. I'm giving her all these chances, and she just keeps getting up. So one more time. Hi, Mom. Okay. At that point, I am so frustrated. I'm worn out. I'm wanting to stay in my recliner, right? And my kid is forcing me to parent her. And I'm just not in the mood. So what happens was, in my mind, I've given her chance after chance after chance. But in her mind, I don't really have to stay in my bed till Mom gets mad. Do you see? She was going to keep getting up until I took action. And the anger was just a sign that I might be getting ready to do something. So the next night, it's, okay, Addie, you understand. If you get up, you're going to sit in that chair, and I'm not going to talk to you for 2 minutes, and then you're going to get right back in your bed. Next night, of course, hi, Mom. There's a lot of fear there, right? Because I've done such a great job fostering that. Go sit in the chair right here. Sit down. I'm going to stay over here. 2 minutes. She didn't like that. That wasn't very fun. She wasn't getting my attention. So it worked. And the next night was a totally different story. But I was up. I was active. I was realizing my role instead of running from it. When our kids lack a healthy fear of us, we try to use anger to get to them instead of action. So anger instead of consequences. Your kids will not obey until you're angry if you've set this up. And let me tell you something. By the time they're 18 years old, you're going to be a miserable, cranky human being just waiting for them to get out. Don't parent with anger. Parent with action. That's very important. Sometimes, in this other example of the servile fear, a child is completely fear-ridden to the point where when you're coming at them and you're harsh and you're punishing them when they have too much fear, they're not thinking about what you're saying. They're not learning from you. They're thinking about, how can I get away from you? I've got to get away from, this is not a safe place. I've got to get away from this person. They're mad. You can't correct your child when you're angry because all they're focusing on is the fact that you're mad. And we've talked about this in earlier series. The same way, if your child is speaking at you in anger and disrespect, do you really hear what they're trying to say? You just hear the fact that you're getting ready to have to deal with some disrespect because of the way they're speaking to you. So most children in America today have a complete lack or very limited healthy fear of their parents, but sometimes it does swing the other way. I'm going to give you a little tip to use called the robot voice, okay? When you're disciplining your children, try to use a robot voice, which means you don't really change your tone much. If you change your tone, they're going to stop listening to you until you change your tone. So just kind of, all right, here's your equation. If you do this, then this is going to happen. Keep it level, keep it calm. I don't care if you have to go in your bathroom and scream in a pillow until you can bring it back down, but try it. There will be nothing to distract them from the true message that you're trying to say.
Good stuff, good stuff. Let's say this too. If we're talking about guiding their will here. If you as a parent want to guide your children's will, it's vitally important that your will is being guided by God's. So, if you're not being guided by the will of your Father in heaven, it's really going to be hard for you to guide your children into God's will. So there's the old saying that we teach what we know, we reproduce who we are. The idea that we can teach something, but if we're not embodying it and living it out, then really it's just hypocrisy. So we need to feel that weight of responsibility and align ourselves with God's will, who is our Father, and model that for our children. If we're not doing that and they're seeing us live differently and we're not in line with God's will, it really lowers the level of respect that they have and their fear and everything else. So those are the first two essentials. The third essential is this: loving, consistent discipline. So 3 essentials for guiding a child's will. 1 is a clear understanding of your God-given authority. Number 2 is healthy fear. Number 3, loving, consistent discipline. Now, I want to just let the scriptures speak to this point. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 6 and 7. It says this: "For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines." I want you to see that love and discipline are not mutually exclusive. And if you feel as if you're trying to withdraw discipline because you're wanting to extend love, what you're actually doing, if you're withdrawing discipline when it's needed, you're actually withdrawing love. Because if you're going to act in a loving way toward your children, the same way that God acts in a loving way toward us, there are times when the only appropriate response in disobedience or rebellion is discipline. So I just want to tear down, if you have in your mind this idea that if I discipline my kids, it doesn't feel very loving. Well, I don't really care how it feels. The truth of the matter is if you're not disciplining your children when it's called for, when it's needed, you're not loving your children. That love requires discipline. So we see this. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges. Now, this is an old word that we don't use very often, but let me just ask you, do you think a scourging was pleasant or painful? It's not a pleasant thing. Okay, a scourging is when you get taken out behind the woodshed, you get your rear warmed up. You know, a scourging is a painful type thing. God does that for us as children when we step out of line. He scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? The writer of Hebrews cannot envision an earthly father who doesn't inflict and instill discipline into the life of his child. And so he goes on in verses 8 and 9. He says, this is a huge statement. If you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. And what the writer is saying there is that if God is not disciplining you, it means you're not his son, you're not his child. Because he will discipline everyone whom he loves, whom he calls a son, or if you're a female here, in your case, a daughter. So furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. The opposite of this is also true, that if you don't discipline, it will lead to disrespect. I mean, they will disrespect you if you don't discipline. They will respect you if you do it and you do it the right way. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? And he closes out in these two verses, verses 10 and 11. It says, for they, our earthly fathers, disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them. I'll just say there is no one-size-fits-all approach to this, that everybody's going to do it a little different, but we all need to be about disciplining it. So it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. So what I want you to see today is that God is pro-discipline. God is pro-consequences. God is pro if you step out of line, you get out of his will. He's pro somebody coming in and changing that. I'll read to you what Proverbs 13:24 says. He says, he who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. I want to make this statement that if you are a parent, you need to feel the freedom to discipline, and at times, depending on the age and the need of your child, you need to be willing to do that through spanking, through inflicting bodily pain. You just need to feel free this morning to discipline. healthy, loving, consistent discipline. So, Janissa, I know that when we think about parenting, or disciplining, there's a right way to do that, a wrong way to do that. So, can you talk to us a little bit about what loving, consistent discipline looks like?
Yes, loving, consistent discipline is predictable, like I said before. It's the dropping of the pin. It's falling. And it's focused on a goal of correcting the child and instilling wisdom into that child, especially as they age, teaching them the reasons why, based on the principles of God. Here's why this is not okay, and here's why this is a good thing to do. It's not discipline based on punishment, based on harshness. It's not discipline based on your mood, how you're feeling that day, and it's not discipline based on just protecting them from ever being uncomfortable. A point I didn't mention earlier is if you protect your child from ever feeling discomfort, they're not likely to ever reach toward God. We reach toward God when we've messed up and we're sitting in the pain of our consequences. By minimizing that or just being too lazy to apply them to our children, we don't give them the chance to reach out to God in their hurt and in their pain. Life is tough, and they need that. They need the Lord on a consistent daily basis. So we must set boundaries out of security and compassion. We must have these boundaries. And I know as parents, we get stuck down in the trenches, and we're just trying to get through a Monday. But what we have to focus on is the higher calling that we have as parents. We have an opportunity to influence the kingdom of God. As Bryan quoted in the first message that I was a part of, your impact for the kingdom is less likely about something you do and more likely about someone you raise. We have a huge responsibility. There is an author, Oswald Chambers, that I love, and he was parenting over 100 years ago. But he made this quote, which I think is so powerful and just hits me right in the heart. But he said, "More than what not to do, we must teach them to manifest the glory of Christ, not just avoid hell." Isn't it awesome that God has a plan for the life of your child to impact his kingdom? He has a plan for your child to participate in his work, and you have a role of getting your child to that place, to that point of readiness. It's incredibly important. One of the things that I want to do is give you some homework. I'm kind of bad about that. I give people homework to go home and do. And I'm actually going to do this myself, and I'm a little nervous of what I might find out. But I want you to go home, and I want you to interview your children. I want you to ask them, what are the rules here? What's important to mom and dad? And what happens if you break the rule? The response you don't want is, "Well, I know I just don't want to make you mad." Okay? They're not getting the message of what the rules are and why they're important. See where you're at. Take an inventory, take an assessment, and your kids are so honest. Isn't that awesome? They're going to tell you the truth, unless they're really scared of you, which we don't want that either. But go home and do that, and things are probably not right where they need to be if you're in the boat with me. Let's take that to the Lord. Let's take this responsibility seriously. Let's get off the couch and let's start taking action. You must base what you tell your children, you must follow it up with action. You can't just keep barking orders at them and hope that they turn out well. This is not just about keeping your kids out of jail someday. This is about teaching them about the character of Christ, and we have to model that for them.
Excellent, excellent. We'll take some questions. So the number up there on the screen, if you want to text the question in, we'll take a few minutes and answer a few questions. First question is this, Janessa. What is the right way and the wrong way to spank kids?
Well, a lot of people are nervous to tell me if they ever spank their kids when they come see me in my office. Like they think I'm going to pick up the phone and call the child abuse hotline. Spanking certainly has a place. It's best used probably with younger children. It needs to be quick in response to the action, but also controlled and never done in anger. If you struggle with anger, this is probably not the best form of discipline for you until you get that under control. If there's any anger in you, then the child's going to assume you're hitting them out of anger instead of truly seeing it as a consequence to their action. And it doesn't work for all children. Some children are going to look at you and say, "Well, that didn't hurt. Bring it on." And you really don't want to try to hurt them next time. You don't want to have to keep upping it to try to get your point across. Every child has a paycheck. Find out what their paycheck is. What is going to matter to them? Maybe it's taking the Lego set and putting it on the top shelf for 24 hours. That might go way farther in shaping a child than a spanking sometimes. You need to be creative and in tune with your kid.
That's very, very good. If a parent discovers, next question is this, if a parent discovers they have been enabling their children's bad behavior, what are some first steps toward changing that?
I think a really good step is to admit it to your child, first and foremost. You have been doing this, and I have been letting you do that, and that is not right. It doesn't line up with the Word of God, and this is going to change. By admitting you're wrong to your child, then you're kind of holding yourself accountable to changing it in the future. And then you need to come up with an action plan and tell them ahead of time. When you do this, your equation, right? Got any math people in here? When you do this, then this is going to happen in the future. Okay? So you need to confess your sin ultimately to your child and develop a new game plan.
I've already noticed in parenting, talking about anger, there have been times where I get frustrated and that I spank or I discipline out of anger. And I keep in mind, James, the writer, says, man's anger does not bring about the righteous life God desires. That Jesus had righteous anger. I generally don't. Like, my anger is not righteous. And so anger is a weak emotion. It's an emotion that leads us to do dumb, silly things. And so when we're acting out of that anger, generally good things don't come from that. So I'm convicted, but at the same time blessed by that. And it's a really good challenge for me to not do that. So another question is this: what are some ways to immediately discipline for not listening the first time?
The best way to do that, I call it having a quick trigger. When the child does it, performs the wrong action, then you quickly take action against it. So, for example, with my daughter getting out of bed, if I had just dealt with that the first time, then I would have been calm, and she would have understood what was needed much easier. Children can learn to follow directions the first time or the 14th. They're going to know when you really mean it. They're going to know when you're desperate enough and angry enough and miserable enough to take action. Just take it the first time. I told you that if you got out of bed, this would be your consequence. When that teenager back talks you, I told you if you spoke that way to me, you would lose your phone for the rest of the day. Here. Not one more time. One more time. There's just no reason for that, and kids learn that, okay, I know I can say this rude thing 4 times before they're really going to do anything about it.
Good. Does rewarding for good behavior on everyday tasks lead to a child always expecting some sort of reward or award for things they should be doing as a part of family chores?
Well, I think it's important to reward hard work or comment on it. I think work ethic is a much more important thing to praise than maybe the job itself. You want to have some specific praise, like, thank you for unloading the dishwasher. You did such a great job on that. But they probably don't need that every day. That's a little much. That would be indulging them a little bit. But I do think kids need praise every day of, you know what, I'm just really glad you're my kid. I love it that you're here to help. It just means a lot to me. So keep those general praises all the time, but you don't want to spoon feed your kid a praise on every little action that they take, or they'll become dependent on it. And we know in reality, when you become an adult, nobody's looking to, throw a party every time you make a right choice. You have to do it for the right reasons.
Is it okay to give our kids a trophy, everything that they do?
It's not okay to give every child a trophy every time. Yes.
Can we clap for that? That is good stuff. Last question is this: is it ever too late to apply these principles?
No, it's never too late. You can turn things around. I have seen situations in my office where there is a child that is running the household and has been for years. This can be turned around. In the same way, God never gives up on us. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on your child. Go to Him. He is the ultimate source of strength and comfort through this.
Amen, amen. We'll stop with that. I do want to encourage you. First and foremost, think in terms of your relationship with your Father. If you're at a place where you're not in line with His will, that's step one. That's where this whole thing begins. And once we submit ourselves to His will, then we become able to lead others to do the same. So keep that in mind. Next week is going to be our final message in this series, and we're going to be talking about speaking blessings. And this is a message that is going to help you whether you have kids or don't, in your workplace, in your home. Every facet of your life, it's going to be helpful. If we could give Janessa one more round of thanks for her service to us. Done an incredible job. I want to pray for us. We're going to take up our offering. If you're an usher, if you would come forward, let's pray. Father, my prayer is now, as it has been, that you would take the word that we have thought through and talked about. You would implant it deep into our hearts, that we'd be able to apply it and live it out, that it wouldn't just be stuff that we hear, a seed that is taken away, but it would be a seed that is implanted deeply, that we would see a harvest come from this. We pray this together in Jesus' name. Amen.